All good? Very good. All good. Hello, everybody. I'm Steve Ketteley. I'm a partner at Wiggin in London. I'm sure Jesper and Richard don't need any introduction, but there they are. This is a really interesting session, and preparing it we had a couple of really interesting discussions in doing the preparation. It kind of builds on quite a few of the things that we've heard already today around the need for the industry to innovate and actually begin to try and self-regulate to a degree, and we hear that from the regulators quite often. It's pretty telling that whenever there is any kind of in-depth compliance assessment of operators these days, regulators tend to focus on four things. AML, we've heard a lot about. RG, we've heard a lot about, so social responsibility. Marketing is one, and governance is another one, which sort of sits on top of all three of those. And we're going to talk about those last two, the relationship between marketing and governance, and the way in which operators and their suppliers can face some of the challenges that the industry is grappling with. Advertising, and we're going to be talking here about marketing and advertising specifically, is the public face of gambling. I mean, if you're anti-gambling, which we continue to read from lots of newspapers, lots of people don't like it, then marketing, of course, rubs it in their faces. But one would think it's legitimate to be able to advertise something which is legal. It's a legal and regulated leisure pursuit. But we do see jurisdictions, and more of them, at least considering, if not implementing, advertising bans either in part or entirely. So the mood music is pretty much anti-gambling advertising at the moment. We always talk about self-regulation, and it's come up quite a bit today. And there are different ways in which the industry is being implored by regulators to do that around areas like consumer rights and fairness, game design, responsible game design, which is a difficult area in itself, player protection with all the things that entails, and advertising is, of course, another one. But balancing that element of self-regulation with the fact you are in a very competitive environment is difficult. And I'm going to come back onto that balance word in a second. But it's quite clear that the industry has to try better in certain things that it's doing, even to make sure that it can sort of stave off some of the political headwinds that we're certainly facing in the UK and clearly in other jurisdictions across Europe. And one of the ways in which I think it can do that is to stop advertising in a socially irresponsible way, which the industry is still guilty of doing. And we're going to be talking a bit about how technology can assist in minimizing that particular compliance risk. But it's easier said than done, of course. The industry is reliant on marketing affiliates, particularly still. I'm not sure necessarily we hear so much what we heard 5, 6, 7 years ago when the industry, I went to a meeting at the Advertising Standards Authority when a very big operator's marketing director stood up and said, it is impractical to expect us to control our affiliates. Those kind of comments don't go down very well with regulators. Ultimately, that means that the business model needs to change because the law is the law and the regulations are the regulations. And if you can't comply with them with your current models, your models need to change, the regulators won't. But the point here is that we are at a crossroads. Simon earlier on made the analogy between gambling and the other two vices that we often consider alongside gambling, being cigarettes and alcohol. And it's an interesting analogy. And in preparing this talk, I was drawing the same analogy. The thing is, cigarettes kill, arguably, everybody that participates in them. Gambling doesn't and alcohol doesn't. But they both obviously come with significant societal risks and concerns. Just before we go on to the questions, I'm going to read something. This is from the editorial from the FT, Financial Times, yesterday. Gambling is in Britain's blood. From Winston Churchill's long evenings of roulette table to the tens of millions who play the national lottery, there is a national tradition of having a flutter. Individuals have a right to spend their money as they wish, but the gambling industry's lack of regard for its impact on society means that government must act to curb its excesses. And the subheadline was, online betting is growing fast. It should be treated like tobacco. This is a real risk, and it's really happening. So, with all that in mind, we're going to talk a bit about compliance generally, and then we're going to move more on to marketing compliance, and then discuss how your two businesses are working together to try and address some of those challenges. So, obviously, both at very senior levels in your respective organizations, we always hear from regulators that expect compliance to be at the heart of your business. What do you think that really means? And how are you as industry leaders facing up to that particular sort of generic challenge? Jesper.
I mean, I think what we try to do is to put that as part of our business and part of the business model. And for us, it's quite simple, actually. We believe that if you are a responsible operator, you will win. Long term, you will get customers appealing to that. I mean, I'm from Sweden. We know that we had we have still, even it's Chinese these days, Volvo, the car brand. They back in the 70s, they decided to be the most safe car ever. And that made their history. They built one of the most ugly cars you could find, but it was the most safe car you could buy, and people bought it. Why? Because I have a safe car, I have an unsafe car, the price is the same. I go for the safe car. And that's what we try to get into our business as well. If we could be responsible, if we could help our players play in a safe way, and with that goes, of course, we should be 100% compliant. That will long-term make business sense. So for us, we are trying to embed this from the board and all the way down to me, my colleagues, customer service, everything, that being responsible is a good thing, long-term. And being compliant you have to be compliant. I mean, as you say, the regulators will not change the rules. You have to adopt to the rules. So for us, this is quite given and embedded into the business logic that we are running Mr. Green on.
I would add to that. I think it needs to be very granular in terms of how all of the staff within an organisation embrace the compliance and the social responsible gambling. That can vary, as you said, from the customer support team to the marketing teams as well. Whether we have historically within the industry always kind of enabled our staff to think in that way, I'm not sure we have, and I think that the winds are changing, and for organisations like ours, we must ensure that everybody within that organisation feels the same kind of commitment to that kind of that business model. Otherwise, it will fail at its very fundamentals. The marketing team will not be kind of aggregating compliant marketing messages. The customer support won't be able to identify, or whether they're having pressure put on them on targets or whatever it may be with the VIP team. If they're kind of disregarding that kind of social responsibility or the marketing compliance, whatever it may be, then whatever you set at a board level or an executive management level will dissipate throughout an organisation. So it has to be ingrained from every single layer of the organisation for it to be successful.
Yes, and I totally agree. And I also think if we take this up on a more higher level, we also have to realize that what we are running right now is a non-sustainable business model. We have to be much, much long-term as operators in what we are doing. I mean, the industry, an average in the industry, we have a churn of approximately 70%. We tend to call it 30% retention because that sounds much more nicer than 70% churn. And then we acquire new customers extremely aggressively, as we heard, to high bonuses. And then we are repeating this and repeating this and repeating this. And this is what we see right now. There's the opinion is heading toward us because we have been running a pretty unsustainable business model for too long time. And still it's profitable, so we are continue doing that. But from a high level, running businesses like we are, we have to look into how could we make our business model more sustainable? How can we retain customers longer? How can we make sure that the customers we have are playing with less risk and actually playing for what they can afford? So it's quite a big stake going on right now, where we have to look at the business a bit differently.
So when the FT says lack of regard for its impact on society, I mean, well, that's it in a nutshell, right? That's the accusation.
It is.
The accusation, and when you're involved in some of these enforcement processes or advanced compliance processes, and you speak to businesses who have been through these things, they kind of look and go, is this us, really? Is this really what the kind of business that we want? And I think you see this word sustainability more and more, and I don't think people just say it because lip service. I think people genuinely, they don't want problem gamblers in their business, right?
No, and I mean, long term, we have to run a sustainable business. We have to find a sustainable business model. Otherwise, I mean, the word in itself is unsustainable. We're going to have a problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked, we're going to talk specifically about marketing. AML comes up quite a lot today, RG, consumer-related issues, so fairness. I mean, it's not really been touched on, but it's been a big, significant part of the CMA's process into investigation into the gambling industry. In your respective roles, where do you see the biggest challenges lying ahead in compliance for the industry? Touching on each of those areas, where's your business or your business particularly concerned?
I think touching on the last presentation as well, some very valid points. I think a worry is that if organizations do take it to heart and they do everything they possibly can to kind of mitigate any of those compliance or regulatory issues, they will put themselves behind the less aggressive competitors and lose market share, which puts the sustainability of the business on a back foot again, because you're just increasing the pressure on the actual profitability in a very, very competitive market. So unless there is an alignment and a kind of an agreement that this is how we are going to treat things throughout the entire industry, there will just be aggressive players who continue to take market share away from the ones who do look after the players or do work with the advertising sports or the regulatory bodies in each country. Failure to do that will just mean that those kind of bad actors in the space will gain momentum. Then they can do that change at a later date while everybody else has been struggling for the last 2 years. So that's a real struggle that we will face in the UK now and in the other regulatory markets in the coming years.
I mean, enforcement can be a bit of a double-edged sword. I mean, if you're doing the right thing, you expect the regulator to make sure everybody else does, and there may be some short-term pain for the industry
yes, but there's a lagging that one. I mean, you are absolutely right. Being ahead of the rest when it comes to taking regulatory measures and responsible measures, that will have an impact on your growth. It will have an impact on your EBITDA, and you have to be really strong and bold to do that, and you have to be big. And I also think that's one of the reasons why we see the consolidation coming right now. We need bigger players. We should remember that the gaming industry has always been dominated by a few very, very big players, because then you can afford to have leisure players. You don't have to run for the VIPs. You can afford to run big jackpots, et cetera, without breaking your legs. And we are back to that now. That's I think, one of the reasons why we see more consolidation coming. And another thing that is a challenge is also, it's not perhaps this topic today, but that we are regulated, that's good. But we are regulated in 8 different models right now. And that puts an enormous complexity onto the organization, which means that we will miss some. We will do a bad thing in Denmark, and we will miss something in Spain, we will, et cetera, et cetera. I think if we could have a common regulation, we would have been much, much more compliant in all areas, because it would have been easier for us, and it wouldn't have been that complex.
I think regulators also need to provide more clear guidance in some cases as well. Where I think
tell it to Sweden.
I think often people have they have a strong and real desire to actually be as regulatory and listen to other people and say, well, what is the best thing for the industry? What is the best thing for the players? And often the responses you get are either vague or not direct enough, or can be interpreted in a multitude of different ways. And that means that it leaves it up to us, and then you're doing things wrong, and then you're kind of slapped on the hand for doing something wrong when you had the best of kind of plans for it.
So we'll come back on that specifically about marketing later, but just on that point, in the preparation for this, we talked about, the British Gambling Commission's approach to regulation is outcomes-based. So they say what it is you need to achieve, and they think you're big enough boys, you can work out how to achieve that. Other regulators can be more discursive, which has led the industry to question the British Commission's approach. What do you want to see, Jesper, out of your relationship with regulators? Do you want them just to leave you to it, or what?
That's a difficult one. I mean, my basic view on this one is that regulators should regulate. They should. These are the rules, and it's up to us to be compliant with these rules. But at the same time, without guidance, that will create so many. I mean, we are like 400 gaming companies, and there will be 400 interpretations of how I can do this, and it's going to start. And someone is more profitable than other based on their interpretation, and that will kind of create this arena where we are today. So I think guidance is important for us to kind of. We see this in Sweden now. There are like 75 applications out there, and I'm 100% sure that there are 75 interpretations of a bonus, because that's totally up there in there. You're allowed to have one bonus, and then okay, what is a bonus? You should figure that one out yourself. It doesn't work that way, because we are too creative. We are still under the pressure of making growth and making more and more profits. So I think it should be. It needs to be some guidance. And then I also think there has to be some regulatory musts, like a self-exclusion register. It has to be common for all operators. You can't have our own. And there are some other areas which should be a couple of musts. But so it's a delicate balance.
As per our preparation call, and we can go off in different directions, can't we? So let's get back onto this, I think. So, marketing. So what are the challenges that your respective businesses seen as operator supplier in relation to advertising and marketing? Where do you see the compliance challenges here? And going back to the original question on your role as leaders, how are you as leaders and as, as board levels dealing with that particular challenge around marketing and the relationship between the board and marketing teams, compliance and marketing teams? Yes, Richard.
In terms of the marketing, so within Gig we have it's a multifaceted company. So we have operators, and then we have the supplier side, and we have the media and marketing. So I think when we saw what was coming in the UK, kind of September time last year, we'd already been kind of in advance of that preparing our own kind of compliance checks, and that's actually how we kind of built the tool Gig Comply, which we then developed into a more commercial. It was actually to kind of self-regulate ourselves, making sure that we weren't displayed on sites where we were, especially as kind of advertising technology is advanced, and you have all of these real-time bidding, display advertising techniques and methodologies, it means that you lose a little bit of control. So we need to regain that control, and we saw it coming prior to, and we believe in sustainability and also being kind of less aggressive maybe, which enabled us to kind of sit back and say, okay, well, let's be this for the long term, make sure that we are doing everything in the right possible way to supply, whether it was new customers to clients, whether it was customers to our own brand. So it was just being a little bit kind of forward thinking from the kind of both the teams who were running it and who had the kind of comfortability to kind of come to us and say, look guys, we are going to face a challenge if we don't kind of self-regulate our own business. So we kind of did that in advance of when Sky Bet closed their, as kind of the headline example of closing an affiliate system. So, and it also enabled us kind of long-term as well to be a little bit ahead, whereas a lot of the affiliates and media businesses were kind of very focused on maybe in January to March this year of making sure everything was compliant. We'd already done that in September. So it actually enabled us to kind of be a little bit ahead in that regard. So I was quite happy with that. But it's something that we need to run, and we also need to monitor consistently. Running as a supplier on a platform, we have our own white labels. We are the ultimate kind of responsibility on that license as well. So the impetus for us to actually ensure that all of our customers in every aspect were being compliant was so heavy on us that we had to push it through ahead of maybe where the market was going in our regard.
I mean, we have two kind of providers when it comes to marketing. One side where they publish what we ask them to publish, TV channels, newspapers, billboards, etc., etc. I mean, we are in control of that one, so that could be internally checked as being compliant, what comes out there. And there's a very, very strong responsibility from the marketing department and the compliance department that these things are synced. Then we have the other half, actually, of the traffic coming in is coming in from providers speaking on our behalf, where we really can't control what they are saying. And this is where these kind of tools are coming into use, because if we have whatever 3,000, 4,000 affiliates, some of them will misinterpret what we said, they will twist it a bit, they will put the traffic somewhere where we don't want to put it, etc., because it gains their business model. And for us, that has been such a challenge before until we started using the Gig Comply monitoring tool, because now we know that wherever they try to do something that is not compliant, we will get the warning signal. And this is a must. We have to have these things, because the regulator will not go to the small affiliate in Leeds. They will come to us. Mm-hmm. I mean, we are responsible for everything that is connected to our business. And not having a monitoring tool in this one and be compliant would have been totally impossible. So for us, this is a no-brainer. This is a must. We must have this kind of tools.
So one of the things that we talked about in the preparation was the role of the supplier and the responsibility of suppliers. Jurisdictions deal with this in different ways. Some jurisdictions regulate affiliates. I think Romania is the only one in Europe that actually provides affiliates that actually have to be regulated. Some US states do the same. Generally, jurisdictions in Europe therefore don't. They put the responsibility onto the operator. It's them publishing the advert. Do you see over time suppliers assuming more and more of that responsibility around compliance-related technology in the same way that certain jurisdictions in effect require them to do so for some of the other sides of the technology, such as game design?
I think they will have a hard time doing it, but I think some of it should be a shared responsibility, actually. And I would come back to just a point that you meant as well, where you talked about it's very hard to control what third parties do. That's true, but I mean, in one of the cases last year, the advertising standards went after misleading terms and conditions on, say, I think it was like 8 affiliate sites of this particular brand. There was also 7 failings on their own website as well. So you see it's kind of multifaceted in that regard. So I think they should be looking at something more like that, or at least it's a very difficult question, I think, and I'm not sure we will ever see a concrete or significant legislation on the media side, because it is seen as supplier.
I'm not suggesting a supplier is going to admit they should assume responsibility. I'm interested in what the operators think.
Now, I think actually this might sound a bit strange, but I think it should be the operator's responsibility. We are adult enough to realize that a game coming from a supplier that totally addresses children, we shouldn't have that on our site. That's up to us, and we are the regulated ones. And it's the same if we have affiliates not functioning, we take them away. I mean, before we still have that policy, we have this one chance policy. Basically, if an affiliate is doing something wrong, we won't pay them. It's super simple. Because they have costs to drive this traffic and we don't pay them, it stopped immediately. All the banned traffic stopped in a month because they realized, okay, we screwed up and we not get paid. And doing that and adding a monitoring tool, I think we have a pretty good control of our affiliates today. And we have to have that because we are responsible for being compliant to the regulator, not the 4,000 affiliates. It will never work.
I also think that suppliers should take on, like you mentioned, game developers. I mean, some of the games that come out, when you see them, it is a worry to see how they could even have thought that would have been acceptable.
Yes.
So they have to take responsibility not to even create those kind of games and think about their end users. And the same goes for affiliates or other advertising third parties. They should also be thinking a duty of care or some regard. I completely benefit that, but then the pressure on that execution of that needs to come from the operators, because they're the ones who hold the cards.
Or you get this blame game. I mean, it wasn't our game, it was their game, and so forth. It will never work in a functional way.
Please, let's not assume a duty of care. Can we not use that word? But it raises an interesting point around, I mean, this goes back to governance. I mean, what you just mentioned is around making sure that the people who are putting the adverts out understand what the parameters are. Because going back to what the FT said, it's all about understanding that balance between the fact that, as they recognize, people should be entitled to spend their money how they wish, but the balance at the moment seems to be wrong. And a lot of it is around player protection, and irresponsible advertising clearly plays a role in that. I'd like to understand, we hear a lot from the British Gambling Commission, we've heard it here today, we hear it from others around technology and the use of technology to assist in managing and compliance-related risk, whatever that happens to be. Talk to me a bit about how your businesses are doing that and using technology to address compliance issues.
I can start with one of the things that the burden when it comes to either source of wealth, KYC, etc., that puts on a supplier or an operator to do those checks as thoroughly as possible, it just increases OPEX, which means it's more difficult for us to kind of sustain profitable business models. So therefore, any kind of technology that we can either build or buy or whatever it may be to integrate to alleviate that. I mean, Sweden is a good example that with the regulators in place that you must have bank ID as a kind of payment methodology, but it also acts as a fully KYC because it's registered with your bank and everything like that. So that alleviates the need to increase OPEX because you're receiving, say, 60% of your customers already pre-KYC, not source of wealth, but pre-KYC. That means that you can then move that focus onto the source of wealth. So technology can play an incredibly important role in making sure that those kind of things kind of alleviate the burden it can put on. New Jersey has it with the social security numbers, things like that, to make sure that they are registered in that country or that state. So.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, we are using technology today to monitor the risk of our players. We publish this or tell the player where the risk levels are. We are using technology for AML. We're using technology for KYC, and of course, we should also use technology to monitor whether we are compliant in other areas. it's impossible to run this business profitable with us using these kind of systems and technology today. I mean, we are still 40, 45 people working with compliance in the company. And if we didn't use all the technology that we do, it would be like 400 or 500 people easily, and it wouldn't be sustainable.
So talk a bit about the relationship between the two businesses. And I mean, I saw it announced in the summer, I think. So how's it going? Why did you choose this particular solution? How have you set it up? So what's the role between the operator and the supplier in terms of how a monitoring solution actually works? Because I'm assuming it's not just that you provide it to them and away they go, but you need some help from them to get it up and running. And
it's actually pretty self-sufficient. So it just requires the operator to input various fields or rules, essentially. Yeah. So what they deem as to be compliant for their brand. So it's actually individually designed. It can be individually designed for anybody, irregardless of jurisdiction, or you can put so if it's Danish advertising, then you put in specific rules for that to what you deem as compliant, and then so we work with them obviously in training periods to make sure that they kind of understand how to actually use it. But it's up to, as I said before, it's up to the individual or the brands or the companies to actually set what they deem as compliant.
So how are you using? What are you looking for?
So the rules are set from a compliance perspective. The compliance department. These are the rules we have to follow in Denmark, in Sweden, in England, in other countries. And then it's actually the affiliate team running this, because they are responsible for the report and seeing what affiliates are not following our rule sets, and then they have the discussion with them and whether they're going to ban them or fine them or whatever. So it's a very operational tool sitting in the center of the department, being responsible for that their affiliates are compliant with our rules. So it's, from my point of view, it's a perfect tool. It's not on my level. It's on the operational level. And but it gives me the assurance that we are measuring and monitoring all our affiliate deals and shouldn't end up in bad places or with bad wordings or with T&Cs that is not functional or bonuses that we never promised, etc., etc.
I think as well, one of the things that we talk about shifting behavior of everyone within an organization. Traditionally, affiliate teams and media teams, marketing departments are measured by revenue generation activities, essentially, or cost effectiveness around generating that revenue. Things like this can actually set up a new KPI framework for those teams to actually change the way their behavior in a daily working environment, so that they can actually see that, okay, have a only 5% non-compliant this month, or things like that. You know, it creates like a culture of compliance as well by being able to identify and measure and monitor those tools. And also,
no, you're right. And seeing the levels of fines in certain markets, we could actually put an ROI on them as well.
And we talked about it generally earlier on, but now specifically in relation to sort of these kind of solutions, monitoring solutions that could be used not just for marketing but wider. Do you think that regulators should be mandating that these are used? We had an interesting disagreement, I think, when we were preparing as to whether we think they should or shouldn't. What's your view on that? And I guess it may not be the same across all regulators, because as we mentioned earlier on, regulators have different approaches to the way they regulate.
No, once again, I think the regulator should regulate and set the limits for what we can and can't do, and then it's up for us to use the tools to get there. If I want to have 500 people doing manual monitoring, I could have that. If I want to have a smart monitoring system, I should have that. Because if they start to say that you should have, then comes the next one, which should we have? And then they have to point out that one. And eventually, if we can take this all the way out, the regulator will become the operator, because you have to use their system, you have to use their tools, you have to use their banning, etc., etc. So it has to be freedom for us to work within.
We disagreed on this point. Obviously, the full scale that you mentioned there, I think.
Yeah, but you want to sell your solution to the see.
But I think it's more that we've demonstrated a failure to regulate ourselves in the industry, and we're getting like better and better as we go along, as we keep getting slaps on the wrist, etc. But I do think that failure to regulate over the last kind of 10 years in the industry should cause the regulators to step up and say, you have failed, therefore we will help you do it. Okay,
I agree on that. We totally failed on self-regulation due to the unsustainable business model we have and the competition, absolutely. But I still think there are hope for this industry to kind of have sessions like this and discuss these areas and grow up and actually make some bold decisions on that we should be able to handle our own goods rather than hand it in the hands of the regulator all the way through, because eventually it's going to be hand-holding, and that doesn't work. It's not that fun either.
No, it's not fun.
We are 45 seconds over time, so I think we're done. Alice, have we got any time for questions? Do we need questions or not questions?
Maybe one question.
Does anyone have any questions? Then that's lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you.